Have you gone through something traumatic but felt the pain deepen because your mom wasn't there to comfort and support you? You are not alone, beautiful. Today, Susan Snow joins us to share how facing her trauma without her mom's support affected her and how she learned to honor her own needs, forged a path to healing, and is helping others along the way.
And I don't blame her for anything, especially that night. It was very chaotic. It was very chaotic. But there were consequences to the decision that she made for me.
This is Richard at the Men of the House podcast. I am also part of the Podcast Connection Network. Check out my show and the other shows like the one you're about to listen to. The link is in the episode description.
Okay, amazing souls, welcome to another episode of Connection Over Perfection. Today we have Susan Snow with us, a woman whose strength and heart have touched so many. Back on Halloween night in 1985, Susan's world took a turn when she lost her father, an LAPD detective, Thomas C. Williams. Through the tough times that followed, dealing with the grief and PTSD, Susan emerged stronger and with a powerful message of hope. She's a living example of resilience, a voice for the power of forgiveness, and a true believer in the strength of community when facing life's storms. She's moved beyond just getting by to really living fully and lights the way for others going through tough times as well. Susan, we are absolutely blessed to have you here with us, and we want to dive into some deep questions that maybe haven't been touched. So, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I know that you have been on tons of speaking events and podcasts, and you wrote a book. Can you just tell us a little bit about your book? Because I know that a lot of your backstory is in that book, and we kind of want to jump forward, but I do want to give you the opportunity to let people know about that book.
Sure, absolutely. So the book is called The Other Side of the Gun: My Journey from Trauma to Resiliency. And I basically wrote it to not just heal myself, but to help others who might be in their healing journey themselves and just giving them some hope moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you. And we appreciate your vulnerability in all that you do.
Thank you.
So, this has got to be extremely traumatic, not just what you experienced with the loss of your father, but how that affected the rest of your life and still with the relationships that you have now. How has writing that book affected your relationship, say, with your mom and other family members?
Well, initially, when you write a book and you're that vulnerable, there's always fear that's wrapped in that. And I did have the fear of causing harm to some of my relationships. My brother, I really didn't have that fear with, because I not only wrote it for myself, but I also wrote it for him to one day be able to read it. He hasn't read it as of now because he has severe PTSD and it might be a little triggering for him. So I am giving him grace and telling him, like, you read it whenever you are ready.
For the listeners, just so that they know, your brother was at the scene,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes, he's the one that witnessed my dad's murder. He was 6 years old at the time. In writing the book, what I realized was that it wasn't just that timing that my mom and I had a strained relationship, it was prior. And when I sat back and I really looked at it, my dad was kind of the mediator. He was the voice of reason. He was the go-between. And when he was gone, I really struggled with, what am I going to do now? How am I going to have a relationship with my mom with him not there? And when my dad was killed, I was 17 years old. So that was more stress and more strain on top of the other trauma that I had received, because in witnessing my dad's body that night, I really struggled with, just in general, what I was seeing and how to navigate what I was seeing. And being 17, I had no tools to figure that out.
Right.
So I relied on the adults around me, and particularly my mom. I will say the night that my dad was killed and we were at the school that he was killed at, when I heard, that he was gone from some ladies that were in the office, my mom was not around. She had been taken aside. Yeah, because there was big police presence. So the detectives were talking to her. And when she came back, instead of giving me what I needed at the time, she said, I'm sending you to a neighbor's house. Part of me wanted to be out of there. I wanted to run. Like I wanted to get out of there. And the other side of me wanted to be with my family unit. At that time, I didn't even know where my brother was. I didn't know if he got hurt. I didn't know. I knew nothing about him. And he was in a totally different part of the school. So I had no idea. But my mom came to me and said, "You're going with a neighbor." And I did.
Wow, that's huge. I kind of just want to stop you right there.
Sure, sure.
Like that is already so much. So I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. So on top of experiencing this loss of your dad, it sounds like you were also experiencing, I not only lost my father, but I have now lost a safe place.
Yeah.
And your mom continued to show you, even in that moment when you really needed somewhere safe, you needed your mom to comfort you, that you had just experienced a whole abandonment of your dad.
Mhm.
Now, in that same moment, you were also abandoned by your mom.
Yes. Yep. And I honestly didn't even realize that didn't even come to my mind and my thought process until I started to reread my own book and
Oh, wow.
really experience as I was writing, really experiencing those emotions all over again and realizing that I'm a mom myself. And if that had happened to my husband, the first thing I would want to do is surround my kids and hold my children and let them know and reassure them that we were going to get through this together. But that
Right.
was not what I received. And so, yes, it started this feeling for me that I was no longer important in this scenario. And this was such a huge story at the time. You know, the media immediately jumped on this. And immediately, unbeknownst to us, we were in danger and we didn't know it.
Mm,
So we had police presence all over our neighborhood. My life turned into a complete, like, something that you can't even wrap your head around.
mm,
And even my poor neighbor that I went with, I mean, she knew my parents for years. She was struggling, right? She didn't know how to wrap her head around what was happening. Nobody did. And then here she has his daughter in her house. Just, I was beside myself, you know, and the only person that at that point that I wanted was my boyfriend,
mm.
who I'm now married to.
Mm.
And he was 19 years old at the time. We had just been dating 3 months. This was a brand new relationship. But even back then, he was kind of my safe space. And, you know, the neighbor called him. I had to be the one when he showed up. He didn't get a lot of information. So his first thought was, "What hospital? Let's go. Grab your jacket, you know, we're going." And I couldn't say the words. If I said the words, it meant it was real.
Mm,
But he was very animate about going with him. And I finally had to stop and tell him he's not at a hospital. He's gone.
mm.
And even for my husband, you know, he dropped to his knees. It was devastating for him.
Right.
And he was 19. So neither one of us had any idea how to navigate all of these emotions, you know?
Yeah, that's huge. So I kind of just want to go back because I think that this is a really big thing that you probably still deal with your mom is in writing the book, your relationship was already strained during the trauma. So what kind of happened to your relationship with your mom after the book?
So, like I said, when I wrote the book, I had to leave it up to the universe. And I knew it would either open up a conversation or it would destroy what was left for me.
With your mom, your relationship with your mom?
Yep. And what it ended up doing is it started to open my eyes to who my mom really is.
Mm.
And I know, we hear narcissistic personality, whatever. And yes, she does have those traits, which were reasons behind some of the decisions that she made. And I don't blame her for anything, especially that night. It was very chaotic. It was very chaotic. But there were consequences to the decision that she made for me.
Right, that duality that
Yes.
she did her best, but it still wasn't what you needed.
Yes. And then we went down the road of my mom's coping skills is drinking.
Mm,
So the drinking intensified the abuse.
mm,
And so, in telling my story, I had to be 100% out there, vulnerable. I couldn't hold back anything because if I wanted the people that I was trying to help to understand who I really am, and the words that are coming out of my mouth are 100% factual and true and raw and vulnerable, I had to. And so in reading my book, she didn't like that.
mm.
And she honed in on the drinking part. And she honed in on, now I never vilified her in this book, ever. Everybody deals with trauma and loss differently. Everybody has different coping skills. She took the route of victimhood
Mhm.
and kind of turtled into herself. And so, even as a teenager, I was left to try to figure this out by myself.
Did you experience also this sense of responsibility of trying to care for your mom on top of trying to care for yourself and maybe your brother as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, 100% from the very beginning, and I was the oldest.
Mm,
So, I had almost this shame and guilt as I started to move through my healing journey that I should be helping her.
mm,
If I'm healing, I should help her heal. I should do this, I should do that, right? And when I stepped back and I really looked at it after writing this book, I realized that that's not my responsibility, it's hers.
right.
And there's nothing I could say or do that is going to change her. Or, the other side of that is I had this fantasy that one day, I'm going to do this and my mom's going to love me more.
Right.
I'm going to do this and she's going to see my point of view. I'm going to do this and so I had this fantasy. And I think a lot of people do this with their parents is they have this fantasy that one day that particular parent is going to wake up and all of a sudden they're a Hallmark movie character mom, right? The one that listens to you, the one that loves you unconditionally, the one that you feel 100% supported by. And I had to let go of that fantasy. So, in a sense, I had to mourn that fantasy of what I really wanted for a mom and have the reality that that's not going to happen unless she chooses to make it happen.
Yeah. So Susan, this is a lot.
Mhm.
Your story is not just about the passing of your father.
Mm-mm.
This is so many layers, layer upon layer of the grief and the loss of your father, but also I know that you have talked about a little bit also that because your brother was so closely involved in the incident, that you were also overshadowed, correct? And
Yeah,
so the pain and your trauma didn't seem as important to others.
right.
And that really played into adding to your trauma.
Yeah, for sure. Even the media in the very beginning, it took him 2 days to figure out he had a teenage daughter.
Oh, wow.
And it was because all the focus was on my mom and my brother, and so be it. But at the same time, it was like, "Look, people, I've had 17 years with this man, and he was my best friend." And so, yeah, I kind of did get pushed out into the shadows. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I was mentally in a place where I knew in order to be as vulnerable as I was and really have to dive into reliving every experience that I've had that has been traumatic, that I would have the tools in order to come out of that and remain as healthy as I could be. I think that a lot of it was I just realized it was time. A lot of people have, over the years, had their own story of my story in their head.
Mm.
And it was time for me to tell my story, the genuine, authentic, real story.
Just a quick interruption. If you're loving this episode and craving more ways to reclaim your voice and your power, I've created a badass boundaries workbook just for you. It's packed with practical steps and heartfelt guidance to help you set those essential boundaries, reclaim your energy, and build deeper connections, because we're all about that. It's another tool to add to your emotional toolkit for helping you navigate healing from trauma and honoring yourself. Grab your digital copy now. Link is in the episode description. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah. I love what you're saying. And correct me if I'm wrong. Part of your healing journey is going from a place where you never really felt seen or heard,
Mhm,
especially after your father passed. You said that he was really the person who would overcompensate for the lack of connection with your mom
mhm,
and that he was your best friend. So once you didn't have that safety and that person to really feel seen and heard, the abandonment and the lack of connection with your mom really left you feeling not valued, not seen, not heard,
mhm,
especially like you said with the media. And so processing your emotions, getting help, healing, writing this book, you were seeing yourself, validating yourself and
mhm.
saying, I do matter,
Yeah.
and helping people that are going through similar situations.
Mm.
Because I think when you look at that trauma, the focus is on the loss of your father, which is immense, right?
Right.
But there's so much more that's happening to you than just that incident.
Right, and here's the thing too, is that I did have therapy in the very beginning. LAPD came to my mom and said, "We're gonna pay for a therapist, and each one of you is gonna get a therapist," and that kind of thing, and, this was 1985, so there was no talk about PTSD, and there definitely was no resources for teenagers, and there was no talk of mental health.
Right? So you had some really bad experiences with this, right?
Yeah, yeah, I did. To make a long story short, I saw this guy for an entire year. And initially, in the very beginning, it started with I wasn't sleeping. So I was kind of a zombie. I walked around in a fog most of the time. People would just point me in the direction to walk, and I would walk. And I was a senior in high school. There was a lot going on, right, in my senior year. And so I was deeply, deeply depressed. I had panic attacks and I wanted to end my life multiple times. Like I had suicidal ideation. I mean, it was bad. And here I am a kid and I have no idea how to verbalize this. No clue. And this man saw me for an entire year, and our sessions were so shallow. And all he asked me was about my relationship with my mother, my relationship with my brother, my boyfriend, and school. He never asked me how that night affected
Mm.
me. And I know I tell people that and they go, "What?" But he didn't. And I think in hindsight, he probably wasn't educated enough maybe to handle the amount of trauma, and so he kind of avoided it. So for an entire year, every time I was supposed to go see him, I was just like, "Today's the day. Today's the day that someone's going to help me. An adult's going to help me. This is going to happen, right? And it never happened for an entire year. And at the end of the year, he looked at me and said, I was a well rounded young lady and I was going to be fine for the rest of my life and that I didn't need to see him anymore.
Oh, wow.
So that thought process only intensified my feelings of I'm broken. I've snapped. There's no going back. Nobody can help me, not even a professional.
Mm.
And this is just something I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. So I've got to figure this out. But the problem is that I didn't figure it out. And because I didn't figure it out for 14 years, I struggled. And I feel like in hindsight, that kept me from really being who I wanted to be.
Mm.
And I always talk about walking around with rose-colored glasses, not being able to really recognize when things were unhealthy around me, making excuses for bad behavior, whatever it was, right? So 14 years later, here I am a mom, and I'm married to my boyfriend who was with me. And we've moved from Southern California to Colorado. And in 1999, I was working as a hairdresser in Greenwood Village, which is close to Littleton, Colorado, and the Columbine shootings happened. And I had taken a break, went into the back room, turned on the TV, and there it was, all of the coverage. And as I was watching the coverage, something happened.
Mm.
I started having flashbacks. I started to turn pale. I was clammy. I was having panic attack. My coworkers at the time didn't know my story. For a long time, I didn't tell people. So they had no idea what was going on with me, nor did I. I had no idea because I had no kids that went to that school and I didn't live in the neighborhood.
Right.
So I could not understand what was happening to me. I remember 14 years prior, I was told that I was fine. That is the mask that I call about the emotional mask. That was the mask that I wore. I'm fine. I'm strong. Whatever people told me I was, this is what I wore. I'm strong. I'm fine. And so, in order to move through my day, I put that mask on and I went out and I did my clients like nothing even happened. And as soon as I walked through that door at the end of the day, all of those emotions came flooding back to me that I dealt with when I was 17. And I started to spiral. And at this time, it scared me because now I'm a mom. And part of me wants to leave this world, but part of me doesn't want to leave my children. And I was really struggling and spiraling. And a few days in, my husband met me at the door and he said, you have two choices. You either get help or I'm putting you in a hospital.
Mm.
So I chose to get help. And I went and saw a doctor, a regular doctor who put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he said, you need to seek a therapist. And I laughed in his office because I thought, wait a minute, that didn't work before 14 years ago. Like, what makes you think that this person's going to fix me? And he said, well, you really don't have a choice.
Right.
You have no choice. Like you've got to do this. And so I did. And thank God I did. Because this woman that I met specialized in severe PTSD and severe trauma. And she was the perfect person for me to be sitting face to face with because within the 5 minutes that I met with her, I told her a little snippet of what happened when I was 17 and then currently what I was dealing with. And she looked at me and she said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I was really confused because I thought, wait a minute, I didn't go to the military. I've never gone to
Mm,
war. Like, what do you mean I have PTSD? And she said, anyone who has experienced anything traumatic, it doesn't have to be to your degree, but anything traumatic can experience PTSD. And what you need to know is that PTSD isn't something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage.
right. That's huge.
And for the first time, I was like, I always describe it as like the sky opened up and rainbows shot out because now I have answers. And now I have an adult, someone who is going to come alongside of me and guide me. And I'm finally going to be able to heal. And so I had hope. I was so grateful.
That's so huge. She helped you make sense of everything.
Absolutely.
That's so huge. So there's a few things in there that I just want to go back to is one that I think it's so important to remind people that when you're looking for a coach, a therapist, a counselor, you do not have to stick with the first person that you go to. They are there to help you. If it does not resonate and it does not work, you can definitely try someone else. And I think that it's really tough because we wanna just try that one time and like, "Oh, that didn't work." It might just be that person, and you might have to go through a few to find one that fits and it works for you, and I think that that is something that we don't talk about enough.
Oh, I talk about it
So
all the time, all the time. When I'm talking to people, I always tell them, "You understand that this is your healing, it's not theirs."
right.
So, the best thing you can do is whatever trauma that you have gone through, right? You wanna make sure that that person is educated in that field and they understand how to guide you through that particular healing. It's not a one size fits all.
Exactly.
You've gotta kind of interview them
Yes.
and understand that in order to do the work, as scary as it is, you have to be vulnerable. And if you're going to be vulnerable with someone, it is someone that you have to connect with, and you have to have that feeling of safety.
Feeling seen, heard, valued,
Mhm.
validated.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that leads me kind of back to what we were talking about a little bit ago is that, we're not blaming anyone. Everybody, like you said, deals with grief in a different way and they're just doing the best they can with what they have. But I kind of want to go back to the relationship with your mom really fast.
Okay.
It sounds very estranged and I can only imagine that that still affects you today. As you said that you wrote the book and that furthered your relationship. What is your relationship look like with your mom now?
We have no contact.
And so you mentioned that narcissistic tendencies and for this show when we're talking about narcissism we're really talking about somebody who is unwilling to get help, to take accountability, to see the perspective from somebody else. And so I can only imagine, Susan, that on top of all of your other healing and grief and PTSD, still to this day, dealing with the trauma and healing, but also dealing with your mom and your relationship with a narcissistic parent.
Mhm.
What is that like for you?
Well, like I had said before, I had to let go of the fantasy that one day she was gonna wake up and all of a sudden this was all gonna be, she's gonna have that mindset of being able to listen to my feelings and me feeling heard. And I realized that that's not who she is innately. And that's not someone she will ever be unless she chooses to be. And she's older, she's up there in age now. And I tell people this all the time, you have to protect your peace
Mm,
because people like that can cause a lot of turmoil and a lot of toxicity, and that affects your other relationships around you because there were some conversations I had prior to the book coming out First of all, she never asked me in the 4.5 years it took me to write it, what I was writing about. Didn't take any interest in it at all. So, when they have, there's that saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. I finally lived that.
Right.
It took me 4.5 years to figure that out. But what I realized is that for my own family, my own self, my own marriage, I need to protect my peace. And so I wish her well. I have no ill will towards my mom. However, I need to protect my peace. And in doing that, she's the one that chose not to speak to me anymore after she read my book. And I took it as a sign from the universe that it was time for me to move on and that I feel peaceful for the first time not having that toxicity in my life anymore.
That's huge. That's huge. And Susan, for any listeners who are dealing with grief, who are suffering from PTSD, or, even in that relationship, that estranged relationship with a parent, what advice would you offer them or what words would you leave them with today?
Here's what I'm going to leave you with. The most important person in this world is you. Because if you don't work on you, it's like a ripple effect. It affects everything in your life. And I've had to have that realization in my journey, in my healing, is that if I don't heal my internal stuff, then it affects the people around me as well. So you have to be the priority. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that have a really hard time with that. But just know that when you do take the time to heal yourself, to figure it out, I tell people once you've done the work and you've gotten to that other side of that healing, you've moved through a lot of the pain part, the freedom from not having that hold over your life is indescribable. You see life and you see things and you recognize red flags and things that you know that you are worth more. It gives you a sense of self. And most importantly, you are taking your power back from whatever it is that hurt you or person that hurt you. You are taking your power back because if you don't heal and you allow this to ruin the relationships around you, or it keeps you from your goals in life, goals that you have for your career, or, whatever it is, you are handing that person, that thing, whatever, your power. So, in order to get that power back, you have to create the kind of you that you can look in the mirror and be proud of. And for the first time in my life, I feel that. I feel like I can look in the mirror and be proud and look back from where I was to where I am now and realize all the work. And I continue to work. Just because I wrote a book does not mean it's over. I'm open to evolution. I'm open to evolve. I'm open to continue on this healing journey. And yes, a part of realizing that I have a parent that is a narcissistic personality, I have had to continue my healing because what I realized is the damage that it caused growing up with someone like that and making me feel less than. And I think part of my being able to walk away for the first time was I'm worth more. And if you can't see that, then I need to distance myself.
It's huge. So huge. Thank you, Susan. As you were talking about taking your power back, it gave me chills because I truly believe that the society does not have their power, has given their power away. And so I am very passionate about helping women, especially connect with themselves and retake back that power. So absolutely everything you said resonated. Susan, thank you so much. Can you please tell us a little bit about where our listeners can find you and what you have to offer?
Sure, absolutely. So, if you want to know more about me, like you said in the very beginning, I am a speaker. I'm a keynote speaker. Most of the time, I consider myself an inspirational, transformational type speaker. So, I do have a website. It's susansnowspeaks.com. I also just started a YouTube channel. So, I'm building on that. I am not technical by any means. So, I'm trying to figure out how to get some of my podcasts on there. So that too is Susan Snow Speaks as well. You can find me on social media just under my name. And I am a realtor by trade, but I'm also a coach and I do some resiliency coaching. And my book is available on my website. It's also available on Amazon
Okay, awesome.
and it is in paperback form or Kindle form. If you are a Kindle Unlimited member, you can actually read my book for free. So I am working on an audiobook. I'm going to be doing my own book.
Oh, I love that.
So it's that's a whole different animal, so I have to get into a studio for that. But I'm working on it. It's coming.
Amazing things. Thank you so much, Susan, for being so vulnerable and just sharing your story with us and
Absolutely.
sharing your time.
Thank you for having me.
The views and opinions expressed by myself and any guest on this podcast are solely ours and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any organizations we are affiliated with. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. As always, consult with a trusted healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or concerns.